Hi everyone, thanks for coming along to tonight's webinar. This is obviously the first webinar we've had for YRP Scotland in 2020. Hopefully it'll be the first of many. I'd like to just give a quick introduction to myself. I'm Martin Ross, I'm the Regional Chair for the Scottish region. We also have with us Heather Steele, who's the Network and Development Manager for YRP Scotland, and of course Alex Hynes, the Managing Director of Scotland's Railway. If you're not familiar with YRP, we are a not-for-profit organisation which aims to promote and inspire the next generation of rail professionals. We do this through events throughout the year. Obviously now, during the COVID period, we've had to do this online, but hopefully that will continue in the coming years. As well, just a little bit of information about the presentation. We'll go through the presentation. If you submit questions in the chat function at the side, we'll pick them up at the end and be able to ask a few, hopefully. But yeah, I'll not take up too much time. So just to provide a quick introduction to Alex. Alex is the Managing Director of Scotland's Railway, probably one of the busiest schedules in the whole country, leading teams in both ScotRail and Network Rail Scotland. He's got a wide-ranging experience within the rail industry, having previously worked as the Managing Director at Arriva Rail North, Northern Rail, the Go Ahead Group, and in roles in London Midland and the Office of Rail Regulation. So, you know, listen carefully. He's got a lot of experience and knowledge to pass over. But yeah, I won't take up too much time, and I'll just pass you straight over to Alex. Alex?
Thank you, Martin, and thank you to everyone who's joined this webinar on this beautiful sunny evening. It is in Edinburgh anyway. And first of all, yeah, I'd just like to thank you for the invitation to speak to you this evening. I'm absolutely passionate about the rail industry, but also helping young, ambitious, bright young things become the leaders of tomorrow. I was the future once. I've been a young railway professional myself, and it's been a very great privilege to speak at a number of events. And one of my 10 top tips to get to the top is to network well and network often. So if you are one of the 36 people who's joined this webinar so far, well done. I thought I would give a little introduction to me, a little introduction to Scotland's Railway, and obviously there hasn't been much happening for the last few months. And I was thinking, how on earth am I going to structure my thoughts for this evening before opening up to Q&A? And I went for the simple before, during and after coronavirus, because we can't talk about the railway without talking about the challenges that coronavirus has given us all. So just firstly, a little bit about me. I've been in the transport sector in the UK for 22 years. I did an economics degree at Leeds University, and I did my dissertation on the franchising of the passenger railway in the UK. So I'm officially a franchising geek. I joined transport consultancy from university. I worked for a company called Halcro. I did that for 5 years, which was great, helping private sector operators with their businesses, a lot of which had just been privatised. And if you remember at that time, the rail industry, patronage was flat. People expected to win these rail businesses, find out they were grossly inefficient and manage decline. That was not the case. Actually, people found businesses which were quite efficient already. There was a patronage boom, and you know, the rail industry had to adjust to that. So I spent 5 years doing that. I then spent 2 years at the rail regulator, which was a fantastic experience. Firstly, as an economist and working in their policy unit. And then I had 8 great years with the Go Ahead Group, who operate buses and trains in London and the South East. And I was lucky enough to be the MD of Northern from 2013 to 2017, which was a fantastic job. When I joined, we were the worst train operating company in Britain, and we turned that business round. But I couldn't resist the invitation to come to Scotland in 2017 to run a country's railway rather than a region's railway, but also run track and train together, because we think that's the best way to run a railway. So I've got this unique and very strange job where I'm the MD of Scotland's Railway, which is both ScotRail and Network Rail in Scotland. And it's a very intense place to work, but it's hugely rewarding as well. So just the next slide. Before coronavirus, so 2017 to 2020 was sort of defined by a huge investment in Scotland's railway, the biggest investment since Victorian time. About £2 billion worth of investment going into the rail network in Scotland. Scottish Government have a very clear business plan about creating, a greener economy, a fairer economy, a great an inclusive society, and investment in railways does just that. So prior to coronavirus, we'd just come towards the end of a big burst of investment, £2 billion worth, about 1.5 billion of that on infrastructure, which of course is delivered by Network Rail, and about 475 million of investment by Abellio in new and upgraded trains. And it was incredibly challenging period. Arguably, we were delivering far too much change at the same time, and it didn't always go perfectly. But prior to coronavirus striking the shores of the UK, the world looked a little bit like this. And for those of you who know something about trains, that's one of our HSTs travelling through Perthshire. And I'll come back to HSTs in a minute, because as well as transforming urban and city journeys in Scotland, we're also transforming intercity travel within Scotland itself. Next slide, please, Heather. Now, I'm conscious that you might not all have a great knowledge of Scotland, and certainly, even though I'm from the north of England, and Scotland isn't very far away from the north of England, I must admit I didn't know much about Scotland until I moved here. So here is a map of Scotland. It is 1/3 of Great Britain's landmass. It's actually quite a big country, but not very many people live within it. A population of 5 million, which is the population of Yorkshire, and it has 7 cities. Inverness in the north, Aberdeen on the east, Dundee, Perth, Stirling, Glasgow and Edinburgh. And only 500,000 people live north of Perth. So very rural north of Perth, and most of the population in Scotland live in the central belt, which is in that Glasgow, Stirling, Edinburgh bit in the middle, the narrowest bit of Scotland. And Scotland also has 10% of Europe's coastline, which is quite incredible when you think about it. We operate about 2,500 services across the nation, with a big mix of commuter, business and leisure. And not a lot of people know this, but in Scotland we have the biggest suburban network of anywhere in the UK outside London. So most of our railway and our passengers and our stations and our trains actually serve the city of Glasgow, which of course is the biggest city in Scotland. We employ, the rail industry in Scotland employs 12,000 people, generates economic benefit of £1.3 billion a year, and we're always working hard to make it better. So the strapline for Scotland's railway is better in the making. Some of you will have heard me say that we're going to build the best railway Scotland's ever had. Which is true, by the way. We haven't quite done it yet, and I'm not leaving until we have. But the marketing people said you can't use that externally because they will dismiss that as a load of old nonsense. It's far too ambitious. So stick with better in the making for the time being and prove them wrong. And on this slide, we've got a big list of exciting projects we're working on, which I won't dwell on because this is probably the dullest slide in the pack. Next slide, please. So the people who will judge whether we have built the best railway Scotland's ever had are our customers, which of course is our reason for being. And we measure customer satisfaction in the UK rail industry using the National Rail Passenger Survey, which I'm sure we all know and love. And what this shows is customer satisfaction with ScotRail for the last 5 years or so. And as you can see, it has been a little bit of a bumpy ride, but more recently we've had very strong customer satisfaction performance. And 3 times in the last 5 years we've hit 90% satisfaction, which for a rail company is pretty extraordinary, given the scale of the operation in Scotland. Satisfaction with our services has never been higher. And actually, if you cut the data using a Network Rail prism, Scotland's Railway, the route and the region have the highest satisfaction across the UK as well. And there's only one train operating company in the UK which is franchised, which has got a satisfaction higher than 90%, and that's LNER at 91%. So well done, LNER, but we're coming after you. And we're putting a plan in place together which builds on our 90% customer sat, because we want to be the best operator in Britain. And I don't think we're very far away from delivering the highest satisfaction on record, for reasons which I will explain shortly. And therefore, I don't think it's very long until my vision of building the best railway Scotland's ever had has come true. We did have some operational issues round about December 2018. That is why we had the dip in satisfaction there. We're not particularly proud of what happened then. We've learned a lot of lessons, and we're keen to share those lessons with the industry to avoid similar issues elsewhere. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we're rather good at in Scotland is electrifying railways. We have a government which believes passionately in creating a greener Scotland. One way to create a greener Scotland and a greener transport sector and a greener railway is to electrify it. And we've got a strong track record here in Scotland of electrifying railways. In fact, most of the electrification which has happened in Britain in recent years has been delivered here in Scotland. And this is timely because today Transport Scotland published their Decarbonisation Action Plan, which I will come back to later on in my presentation. So if you think about Airdrie Bathgate, Paisley Canal, Stirling Dunblane, Edinburgh, Stirling Dunblane Alloa, I should say, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Shotts Line electrification, these have all been delivered in recent years. And generally, our performance here has been quite good. Edinburgh to Glasgow electrification was a project which ran late and over budget, and that was very high profile. When I first arrived in Scotland, and I spent my whole life apologising for it. But since then, every single enhancement project which has been delivered in Scotland, electrification included, has been delivered on time or early, on budget or below budget. And that's a huge testament to the teams within Network Rail and the supply chain. And I also think it's a sign that the way we work things in Scotland, with extraordinary deep collaboration and partnership between Transport Scotland and ScotRail and Network Rail Scotland, is yielding some benefit, because these projects are a damn sight easier to manage when there's a strong and close alignment. And then also, if you look at the unit cost of electrification, we benchmark relatively well. Clearly, the UK has a long way to go to match the best performance in other countries of the world, and key to that is having a stable vision, a stable work bank, so we can get even better at it, get the unit price down and deliver these benefits to customers more quickly. And of course, the good thing about electrifying railways is it allows you to introduce brand new electric trains. The next slide, please. So this is a Hitachi Class 385, and that is the most reliable new train in Britain. So we love opening the pages of Modern Railways every month, and Roger Ford telling us that this is remaining the top dog of new trains in Britain. When I was in the West Midlands working for London Midland, we had brand new Siemens trains, and we were delivering 100,000 miles per casualty on those trains. And I've said to Hitachi that there's no reason why we can't deliver the same with a electric train, which is being built by you and maintained by Hitachi. And Hitachi are part of our team. It is a fantastic, brilliant train. I used to commute on it every day between Edinburgh and Glasgow. It has transformed the customer experience. Not only are we delivering more reliable journeys, but more comfortable journeys, but it's also enabled us to add in a lot more seats across the network. So there used to be about 800 trains in the fleet 3 years ago. There's now 1,000. We've added about 25% more seats since the start of the ScotRail franchise. And that's also enabled us to cascade other fleets internally. And last year we retired our most aged fleet of electric trains, the Class 314s, which operated in the Glasgow area, which had seen better days. And so what we're seeing now across the network is lots more faster, greener, longer trains, which are helping to support the customer experience. We have 70 of them. Hitachi maintain them at Craig and Tinney. Obviously modern electric trains don't require much maintenance, and so we've got big parking facilities at Miller Hill on the outskirts of Edinburgh and Eastfield on the outskirts of Glasgow, and if you haven't been on one of them, they are absolutely fantastic trains. So again, the fact we're at the top of the leaderboard is great work by colleagues at Transport Scotland, ScotRail, Network Rail in Scotland and Hitachi to deliver that industry beating performance. Next slide, please. Into Severn City. So in the old days, British Rail used to operate big trains between the 7 cities of Scotland, and a part of a cost reduction exercise, the intercity big railway within Scotland was replaced by a cheap and cheerful DMU railway. So latterly, if you'd been travelling on a longer distance ScotRail service within Scotland, you would have travelled on a Class 170 train. It's quite a long way to Inverness. That's quite a long time to be sat on a 170. And when Transport Scotland did a consultation for the franchise back in 2014, I think it was, and did a lot of market research, customers said, oh, well, we don't get those ScotRail trains down to the central belt from Aberdeen and Inverness. We wait for the cross-border operators instead because they've got proper trains. So if you can't beat them, join them. And we are in the process of procuring 26 of these shortened high-speed trains, which has probably been one of the most painful wrong stop programs I've ever been involved with in my life. These trains came off Great Western. They had to be refurbished by Wabtec. They're actually owned by Angel Trains, and the contract between Wabtec and Angel Trains was not very sensible because it assumed that these trains were in a perfect condition, which of course they weren't after 44 years of squadron service on the Great Western. Nevertheless, we have 18 of these fabulous iconic trains in Scotland. At the moment, they're all 4 carriages, and 17 of them get enhanced to 5 carriages long later on in the year. And there's lots of them knocking around the network. And the difference in quality, speed, comfort, ambience between a 170 and a high-speed train cannot be understated. And they will form the backbone of our Inter 7 City product. which we would be marketing heavily now, where we're allowed to market our product. But that is very, very exciting. If you take a long distance train journey on ScotRail within Scotland, the chances are you will be on a fantastic refurbished HST. We've done lots of things to make the product Scotland friendly. We've lined the seats up with the windows, we've created loads of luggage space for the visitors that we have to Scotland. You know, a big part of the Scotland economy is tourism, or was, and certainly foreign travellers to Scotland like to explore the Highlands. They carry a lot of luggage with them, and these trains are fit for that purpose. So we're very, very excited about HSTs, which I'm sure you can tell. And again, these improvements are still coming online, and that's what gives me great confidence that in the next 12 months or so we will hit the highest satisfaction on record. Next slide, please. And of course, we shouldn't forget about freight. So, you know, freight is very important to the Scottish economy, particularly in an environment where road infrastructure can actually be quite poor relatively. So lots of single carriageway roads, for example, some interesting weather. And of course, in Scotland, we're further away from the south coast and other bits of the UK. And as we know, one of the key things that drives the economics of rail freight is distance. And Network Rail is required by Scottish Government to produce a freight growth plan. And we've done that. And our plan is to grow rail freight in Scotland by 7.5% over the control period 6. So that's 2019 to 2024. And we developed that growth plan in consultation with the rail freight industry to some good effect. So Highland Spring, you know, those people who make the mineral water in the Perthshire Hills, we are building a rail connection to their factory that will enable Highland Spring to move from Scotland down south to the restaurants of London on a freight train rather than HGVs. And of course, every freight train takes 75 lorries off the roads. And we're also developing new markets on timber and paper products. Obviously, Scotland produces a lot of timber-based products. And during coronavirus, we were able to run a new trial service operated by Colas Rail between Aberdeen and Spalding, it was paper product destined for a factory at King's Lynn. So we're working hard on rail freight, making sure that the rail freight industry knows that we take freight seriously, we have a plan, and we need to respond quickly and efficiently if we're going to be able to respond to the rail freight market. Very different market dynamics compared to passenger, because often you're competing with an HGV haulier who are generally fairly fleet of foot. So some good stuff on freight in the pipeline and more to come. Next slide, please. So yeah, what about Scotland's Railway during COVID? So here's an HST with its face mask on. Couldn't resist putting that into the presentation slides. Face coverings are mandatory on trains and on stations in Scotland, have been for a while now. Compliance levels are incredibly high, which is fantastic to see. And that's enabled us, as of yesterday, to move to 1 metre plus physical distancing on stations and trains, down from the 2 metres, which obviously is very important, so we can accommodate more passengers as demand builds back onto the railway. So I put a few slides in the pack just to explain a little bit about how we've been managing coronavirus. Next slide, please. So you'll remember the 23rd of March, I do, because it was my birthday. Boris was on TV telling us to stay home. Clearly, up until that point, we'd seen the number of passengers evaporate from the network, and shortly thereafter we put in a temporary timetable which reduced the timetable down in order to protect the service, because at that point we weren't sure how many of our colleagues would actually fall victim to the virus and whether we would have problems actually operating the train service. So we very quickly put together what we called a rail recovery task force, which was ScotRail, Network Rail Scotland and Transport Scotland working together on managing through all these issues. And since then, I've chaired a twice weekly call between those three organisations to manage the industry's response to coronavirus here in Scotland. And I must say, you know, the teamwork between those three organisations has been absolutely extraordinary. And I think we need to pay tribute to our first line colleagues who, you know, I just think have done an extraordinary job of running a railway safely and reliably for passengers and for freight throughout the pandemic, when people like me were staying at home and working from their kitchen tables. You know, they were out there through all that fear and uncertainty and weirdness, and they've just done an amazing job. And the Rail Recovery Task Force, we've actually broadened to include other organisations like cross-border operators, British Transport Police, Transport Focus now join it, and Transport Focus are doing weekly passenger research at the moment, and we're using that data to influence how we manage the virus. And so real great partnership working there, including with the trade unions, which I'll come back to shortly. Next slide, please. And of course, you know, we all went out to the doorstep on Thursday nights and we clapped those people in the NHS and the care sector who were looking after people who weren't very well. And we were keen to show our solidarity as being part of Team Scotland. And so we took this opportunity to light up blue some of Scotland's iconic railway features, which we're very proud of. So top left there, Glasgow Central, top right, Wemyss Bay Station, which of course is the most beautiful station in Britain if you've never been there. Bottom left, Glenfinnan Viaduct, lit up blue. I think the person who took that picture is still recovering from their midgie bites. And on the right hand side, the new Dundee station. So you know, the railway is a part of society. We've done an extraordinary job, but it was also important for us to show that we're part of the fabric of Scotland, and wanted to pay our thanks to those people on the front line of combating this virus. Next slide, please. So I talked about the trade unions. So, I mean, the trade unions clearly are seriously important stakeholders in our industry, and I don't think they're always treated as such. And I remember in my last job when I was at Northern, and I had the unenviable task of having to implement driver controlled operations, spending lots of time with Mick Cash, who's the General Secretary of the RMT, talking about how on earth we were trying to navigate this tricky issue. And I remember him saying to me, you know, when all of this is over, we've got to get the rail industry working with the trade unions properly, because no one wants to go through this again. And I agree with him. And I think one of the things that coronavirus has done is strengthened and deepened the partnership we had with our trade unions. So Scottish Government has a very strong fair work policy. And at the start of the coronavirus, actually Scottish Government put a statement out saying, we expect employers in Scotland to work in partnership with the trade unions. You know, how about it? And we created a partnership working subgroup of our task force, and we've invited the TUs into our recovery planning in the tent at the heart of the decision-making process before we actually go out and consult formally. And I think it's brought us closer together, and it's one of the key legacies I want to keep when all of this is over. You know, at the end of the day, management and the trade unions don't agree on everything, but frankly 95% of what we're trying to achieve is the same, and we should act in accordance with that. So, you know, working with the trade unions, involving them meaningfully before any formal consultation, treating them as the super stakeholder that they are, is really important and has been brought to the fore through managing coronavirus. Next slide, please. I mean, the rail industry is getting a lot of criticism at the moment for messaging, but actually our messaging in Scotland is very strong. It's always been the same. We've never changed it. All you need to know is the 5 rules for safer travel, and if you do those things, we can keep our customers and colleagues safe. Very, very, very good communications, and if you travel around the network, you can't miss it. It's very clear. And I was with the Cabinet Secretary for Transport in Scotland yesterday, Mr. Michael Matheson, and he was complimenting the rail industry about what an amazing job they've done during coronavirus, but particularly the communications and the social media. His view was it's the best he's seen of every industry, so that was really good. So not only have we done a good job, our communications has been effective, which is good to see. Next slide, please. Essential workers at work. So, you know, I always say the way you make a great, you know, good business great is you turn it upside down. And I'm always very keen to hear from the front line on how we can improve our business. And every Monday afternoon, I do a call to all Network Rail staff in Scotland, and have done since the start of lockdown. And the picture there is of a guy called Michael Hughes, who's a level crossing manager at Irvine in south of Glasgow. And he said, when I'm conducting my level crossing checks, the public won't stay 2 meters away from me, and I feel unsafe. And what are you doing about it? And I said to Michael, well, what do you think we should do about it? And he said, well, how about some PPE, asking people to keep their distance? And I said, well, that's a good idea. And 2 weeks later, he was wearing it. And if you go to Glasgow Central Station, you can see our colleagues also wearing this PPE to remind people to keep their distance. And this, for me, was another example of where the speed at which we acted, the way we cut through the red tape and all the tiers of management, we need to keep all of these great things that we've done during coronavirus and keep them and make them BAU, because I'm absolutely passionate. The way you make a good company great is you turn it upside down. It's my job to help Michael do a good job for passengers and freight. It is not my job to tell Michael what to do. So, essential workers at work. Thank you. Next slide, please. And I talked about that responsiveness. So because at the height of the lockdown, we were operating so few services, that actually enabled us to be much more responsive than we normally are. You know, we ripped up the timetable planning rules. The timetable planners have done an amazing job through the crisis. And so we were able to tweak the timetable based on individual customer feedback, people who worked in hospitals or care homes or supermarkets, customers getting in contact with us via social saying, could you just make this train 20 minutes earlier? And we did. And the Nightingale Hospital for Glasgow, the NHS Louisa Jordan, which was built in Glasgow, which thankfully was never used for coronavirus. Again, we added more services into the timetable to serve Exhibition Centre Station, which is the one nearest that. So that responsiveness to the individual need was really great to see. And whether we've been helping the community, distributing free face coverings to customers, 20,000 of them in the last few weeks, or using trains to take material up from the Central Belt to Aberdeen for helping health institutions and their PPE requirements. You know, the very, very best of railway people and their pride and passion and commitment to public service has been seen throughout this pandemic, and it's been very humbling to see. Next slide, please. So what about after COVID? Well, we talked about better in the making, and clearly the world has changed a lot, and lots of people have died from coronavirus, which is terrible. The impact on the economy has also been terrible, but we also have some opportunities to actually make some things better than they were before. So a good example would be on train service performance. And even after the public health crisis has left us, we'll be left with an economic issue, and the rail industry needs to make sure it plays its full part in getting the economy going again. So I stole this phrase, build back better, actually off SCDI, which is the Scottish Council for Development and Investment. And I was using it before Boris was using it. Now Boris is using it. In fact, everyone is using it. Is how can we build back better? Let's not go back to what we did before. Let's do something different and better. And we've got a great opportunity to do that in a number of respects. Next slide, please. So the first thing we got to do is to put the train service back. And here in Scotland, the kids will go back to school full time, hopefully from the 11th of August. And in preparation for that, next Monday, we're uplifting our timetable to our new normal, which is round about 90% of the service. We can't go back to a full service because, of course, the rail industry in Britain hasn't trained a driver since the start of lockdown, because you can't socially distance within the cab of a train. So we're putting 90% of the train service back in from Monday. 100% of the peak capacity is going in, and that, combined with the move to 1 metre plus social distancing, will help us accommodate any traffic we see from the schools reopening. And that's not just people who work in the education sector, the school kids themselves, but of course a lot of people have been prevented from going to work because they don't have childcare. And with the schools opening, that might enable people to go back to work, which means we can get some more customers back. And we've done some brilliant analysis on why our punctuality has been so amazing during lockdown, because we had fewer passengers and fewer trains. And believe it or not, that impact hasn't been felt universally across our network, just in pockets. And our performance team have done this great analysis which says this is where your timetable doesn't work. And the timetable that we're going to implement on the 3rd of August incorporates all the lessons we have learned from the punctuality uplift that we saw as we were operating fewer trains with fewer customers. And we're never going to have a better opportunity to hit our performance target of 92.5 ppm. It's a lot easier to add trains into the timetable than it is to take them out. So building back better timetables, so we're operating a boringly reliable railway, is critically important, because we know punctuality is the biggest driver of customer satisfaction. And we're absolutely passionate about getting this right. And we'll do a full evaluation of what happens next week and build in further improvements in December. And as the driver training situation eases, then we can make conscious decisions about what services we add back in beyond August. Next slide, please. So after the public health crisis has gone, and of course there's no prospect of that at the moment until there's a vaccine, which could be next year, we actually have another crisis to deal with, and that's the climate change crisis. In parts of the world, the planet is literally on fire. The globe is warming at an alarming rate, and as a result, the climate is changing. We're seeing that here in Britain, where we used to have a temperate climate and it's becoming less temperate. Cooler winters, hotter summers, more rainfall, more storms, and the railway is feeling the effects of that. And so in this control period, we have 22% more money to spend on the operations, maintenance and renewal of the network. About a third of that is specifically aimed at climate change adaptation. And we're doing lots of work to make our network more resilient, from a safety and performance perspective, because the weather is different from when the railways were built. We have to have a railway north of the border that works up to 35 degrees. We have to have a railway south of the border which works up to 40 degrees. And I think railway management have been a bit slow to cotton on to climate change, if I'm honest. This is not severe weather, this is normal weather. And the sooner we get used to managing it, the better. So here's a picture of a ScotRail 380 on the coast at Saltcoats with that rather spectacular electrical effect there. You know, we have to regularly suspend electric train services on that bit of the network because salt water hitting the overheads, and it's not credible for us to say, oh, by the way, when we get a storm we have to switch your railway off. No, we have to find engineering solutions which enable us to operate a railway in the weather that we're now seeing. Next slide, please. So today, this is a well-timed webinar. The Scottish Government have published their Decarbonisation Action Plan for Scotland's railway. And last September, I think it was, the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, stood up in Holyrood and she announced the plan to decarbonise the passenger railway in Scotland by 2035. And today, Transport Scotland have published the plan, and this is a hugely exciting moment for Scotland's railway, because I think sometimes in railways we're guilty of thinking in chunks of franchises, in control periods, but now we've got a 15-year plan to aim at. We will be doing lots more electrification, we will be procuring lots more electric trains, we will be using hybrid battery technology in parts of the network where it helps us manage the transition. And for those bits of the network which we will never electrify, hydrogen appears to be the best solution. And if you haven't already seen this document, I would urge you to read it. It's a bold, ambitious plan, and we can't wait to get started to delivering it. So electrifying East Kilbride, Barhead, the Borders, Fife. We're opening a new railway in Leavenmouth. And the challenge for the rail industry is, here's a customer who said, we want to decarbonise in the next 15 years. You know, it's our job to try and deliver that as quickly and efficiently and as closure-free as possible. So we can decarbonise, improve the railway at the same time, and do our part to help tackle the climate change crisis. Next slide, please. And of course, a railway without any passengers is a bit of an expensive hobby. And I think one of the key challenges we are going to have is to win back passengers and freight to our network. We're only carrying 30% of the customers we had before lockdown, but there are a different 30%. Leisure is coming back more strongly than commuters. I think rail demand, I think 80% of rail demand will come back quite quickly. I think it will be a different 80%. But the rail industry is going to have to, you know, tailor to new markets that we're seeing. You know, people work from home before, but now rather than 1 day a week working from home, 2 days a week working from home might be the new norm, because people are travelling into the office less often. They can live further away and not affect their work-life balance so much. The economy is a lot smaller than it was just a few months ago, and that's not good for rail freight. And so we must remember that, you know, we get all our money from either taxpayers or passengers. And if we're not winning passenger and freight markets back to our railway, which arguably we might have taken for granted during the post-privatisation patronage boom, we're going to have to really get into the business development mindset, because this business is not going to fall into our laps without conscious effort. You know, we've taught the whole bloody world how to video conference. We need to remind them how pleasant travelling by train is as soon as we're allowed to do so. So I think business development will be a big theme for us going forward. Next slide, please. And just finally, we in Scotland, for example, we've delivered all these fabulous projects on time, on budget, but we are what I call reassuringly expensive. People do find the cost of railway projects extraordinarily high. There's a picture in bottom left of Queen Street Station, our new redeveloped station in the heart of Glasgow, which is extraordinary to see. It's going to be fantastic. And top right is a new station at Kintore. But politicians and civil servants find the cost of railway projects very, very high. And if we're going to earn our keep and stay relevant and make sure we get our share of government funding, we're going to have to get the cost of these projects down to remain efficient and competitive, and therefore remain relevant in a post-coronavirus world. So I think that was my final slide. So I will shut up now and take any questions.
Hello, thank you for that, Alex. That was a fantastic talk. And I've got about 2 pages here of questions just for myself, which I won't start with. If you do have any questions for Alex, please pop them in the chat, and I can see that we've already got a few in there. So I will start with the first question from Simon Kendler, which came in. Simon is our London and South East chair. And Simon says, given today's announcement regarding electrification, what are the rolling stock plans going forward? Will the HSTs be replaced by appropriate intercity EMUs? And what's the thinking for the lines that won't get the fizzy knitting? So hydrogen, battery, hybrid, and you touched on that in the last slide. But yes, what are the plans for electrification?
I mean, this is the great benefit of having a 15-year plan, because we now pretty much know where we're going to electrify and where we won't, and when. And that enables us to produce a rolling stock strategy. And then once you've got a rolling stock strategy, you can have a strategy for depots and stabling and train crew depots and timetable. And Transport Scotland and ScotRail and Network Rail Scotland are working extraordinarily closely on this. So this will enable us to make really sensible decisions. So we're already talking about what trains will replace the HSTs. Scotland should have an electric intercity train connecting its 7 cities. There's no question about that. And the sooner we start thinking about that and procuring it and prototyping it, the better. The issue will be how we manage the transition. Do we buy coaches with loco hauled and we change the traction on the front, or do we buy a bi-mode, which might be an electric diesel bi-mode at the start, but maybe an electric battery bi-mode? These are the conversations we've started to have now with the supply chain, with the rolling stock manufacturers, with the Roscoes, so we can come up with an integrated plan. So yes, sadly, we are already planning the replacement for the HST. And I think this integrated working between the 3 big components of the railway in Scotland is absolutely critical to making better decisions. But also, normally we procure trains through a franchise. We start a franchise, we do it all in a big rush, they don't work out of the box, and I remember saying to Saida, who's the fleet director at ScotRail, how can we avoid this early reliability problems with rolling stock? And she said, you've got to prototype trains, build a prototype, test it on your network, tweak it, and then build a fleet's worth. And the fact we've got this 15-year plan means that we can start looking at those things in a way that we just haven't done in recent times. So yes, rolling stock strategy is absolutely at the heart of our plans for decarb.
So I know you just said that the HSTs will be replaced, but we have a question from Kieran McGill who says Class 385 or HST, if you had to choose, which is your favourite train?
HST.
Okay.
HST, no question. I think they are. This for me, the HST is like a fabric brand. It's part of the railway. It's part of Britain. We can all remember. Yeah, it's just an iconic design, isn't it? In a way that new trains aren't. New trains are functional.
Okay. So we might see a few hanging about on the network if we can. So another question here from Brad Gallagher. He says, do you envisage there to be a change to TOC franchising in the near future following the EMAs that have been put in place? And perhaps you can explain what an EMA is as well, just for those of the audience like myself who aren't aware.
Yeah, so obviously the way franchises work is the private sector takes revenue risk for the period of the franchise, and the revenue disappeared on the 23rd of March. So all the franchises were within days, weeks, months of going bust. And DfT and Transport Scotland very swiftly put in place these emergency arrangements, these emergency management arrangements, which saw all the cost and the revenue being met by government. So just like government has done furlough and helped other sectors, they've helped the rail sector as well. And at the moment, all the franchises in the UK pretty much are on one of these emergency arrangements. They run out in September. And my view is that they will probably all be extended for a period of time, because you can't reintroduce franchising and ask the private sector to take revenue risk again if you can't predict it. And of course, what's driving the revenue of rail at the moment is nothing to do with the rail industry, and it's everything to do with the public health advice. So my view is expect to see those arrangements be extended. And of course, you know, there was a rail review pre-coronavirus. We talked about the Williams review having a white paper, maybe a change of law to see structural change in the rail industry. That's all a bit pre-coronavirus. So I think we will see industry reform. I think it will be evolutionary rather than revolutionary. I think the fact that all the franchises are in effect dead, you know, might pave the way to structural reform, and we might see more concession type contracts being introduced in the future. But who knows? It's up to Mr. Boris.
Okay. Just to follow on from that, you've mentioned a bit about how the projects work within Scotland and how this this collaboration really is key to getting that on time and in budget. How do you think that other UK projects can do that? And I suppose that ties on from the question of will franchising change? How do you think that the UK could learn from Scotland? Yeah,
I mean, I think, you know, Scotland is a great case study, but it's not a template. Yeah, so Scotland is a country. It has a border. The Transport Scotland is the national transport agency. Transport Scotland has powers to franchise passenger rail services and to specify and fund Network Rail. And of course, 92% of the passenger trains in Scotland are ScotRail trains. So you've got this unusually high level of overlap between the infrastructure manager and the train operating company. And Scotland isn't perfect either. But I think as we try and squeeze more out of the system, and as we try and upgrade these projects, track and train has got to work hand in glove. You know, and the reason why it went so badly wrong in the northwest in May 18 is because track and train was not working hand in glove. And the railway is a system, and you can't thrive unless, you know, your other partners in the system are also thriving. So I think it's important we see the railway as a system. We work in collaboration with all the different organisations in the best interests of passengers and freight. That has to be our guiding North Star. And it's quite incredible in some instances how little parts of the industry talk to each other or understand each other. And I would urge everyone on this call to try and learn a bit about the rail industry that they don't know about. I've done that with my own career. I was the MD of a train operating company, and I didn't know much about infrastructure management, and I do now, but I didn't before.
Okay, I'm just looking at those questions. I've got we'll just check the time. I've got 2 more questions here, and I could go either way on these out of that talk. But you were talking about the railway operating as a system, and I know you've touched on decarbonisation moving forward and electrification, but we haven't spoken about digitalisation. And there's a question here from Wasim Ahmed, who says, have there been any discussions for European train control system rollout in the future? And obviously for ETCS, you'll need the train and the track to communicate and work together.
Yeah, so there have been discussions, and in Scotland, again, Network Rail is required by Transport Scotland to produce a whole system, whole life signalling strategy. And Transport Scotland and ScotRail and Network Rail and our supply chain, particularly Siemens, who are our framework signalling contractor here in Scotland, have been working up that strategy because we've got some really big decisions to make. And of course, on a Victorian mixed traffic railway, digital is it's huge. It's absolutely huge. And so we are having those conversations, but we have not concluded what the future train control systems look like. To the best of my knowledge, no one has implemented digital railway on the scale of network like Britain's, with all its complexity and mixed traffic. And so it's a conundrum which continues to elude us, but we're working on it. Yeah,
I think digitalisation is that could be a topic of a whole other webinar, I expect. So as I say to everyone, thank you for your questions. I'll just finish on this last one from John Ryan, who says, thanks Alex, it's been a fascinating talk. It strikes me that a railway is a railway is a railway is certainly not the case in Scotland. So what do you think has been the greatest single success or enabler in Scotland particularly?
I think it's alignment. So, Scotland as a country has a business plan which says we want to be greener, we want to be healthier, we want to be wealthier, we want to be safer. And then they ask Transport Scotland, can you go and buy those outcomes for us from the transport sector? And then Transport Scotland say to Network Rail, I want you to deliver those things and here's the money. And they say to ScotRail, I want you to deliver those things and here's the money. And those things are aligned with each other. And so that alignment between the rail industry, the agency, the transport agency, the government, and the sort of society and the economy that Scotland wants to see is really strong and really powerful. And it creates an environment in which railways can do extraordinary things.
Okay, I think that's a fantastic point to finish on. And certainly, as we move forward with Scotland's plan and transport within Scotland's business plan, it will be fantastic to see how that comes together. And thank you very much, Alex.
Yeah, so thanks very much, Alex, for the presentation. It's brilliant to hear so much about Scotland when you're wrapped up in your own bubble. You don't really realise how much is actually going on. So that's great, and I hope everyone enjoyed it. So yeah, obviously I'd like to thank Alex and Heather as well for keeping everything running in the background and compiling the questions. As well, just for anyone in attendance, you will get a survey after it. If you can respond to it, it'll help us, form some of the events in the future as well. And obviously, if you want to get involved in YRP, get in touch. We've got a new website. We're on social media as well. It'd be great to have as many people involved as possible. But thanks for coming along. We'll call it there.
Thank you.
This is where I now can't find the switch off button. So I can see the attendees are going down. Let me just find out how to finish the webinar.
Was that okay for you, Heather and Martin? Oh, I can't hear you now.
Oh, sorry, that was fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think we've still got attendees in. I had this problem on the test that I can't figure out how to finish the broadcast.
Well, if there's any feedback, do let me know.
Yes, yeah, we certainly will. And we will be putting this out as a sort of a write-up of the event as well. So we'll make sure to double check that with you. We don't have any sort of leftover questions. I think we did manage to get through them all, which is brilliant.
Good.
So thank you.
Yeah,
Good.
thanks very much, Alex.
No problem, Martin.